The situation with disinformation and the Middle East, my view of it came in having debriefed a particular defector. He was a KGB colonel. He was from a northern African nation. It was from the early 80s, and a very competent man, and who defected not unlike General Pachepa. He put the burn noose and the caftan, and he rode his bicycle into the U.S. Embassy. I mean, how do you do it if you're going to do it? In any event, as we debriefed him, one of the questions was about the PLO and their connections with Russians, and it had been a position that the U.S. government had that there was no connection between the Soviets and the terrorists. The first, I think, knowledge of terrorism in the U.S. was when Claire Sterling wrote a book, The Terror Network. It was, I believe, in the 70s. Arnaud de Bourgrave, who wrote a book called The Spike, he and Robert Moss, he was a Newsweek reporter in Europe, and he ended up coming back to the States. He's 88 and he still works for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Anyway, he had helped Claire Sterling write the book, and others who I've known over the years. So there wasn't much knowledge of how terrorism was actually functioning. So when I was debriefing the Russian, I knew no more than were in those books. And so we were really on the wrong side of the 8-ball. And I knew an individual who was in the Reagan administration, and he was a professional regarding international matters. He had been an advisor to Secretary of State Alexander Haig. And he showed me on a confidential basis a document that he had written, which summarized in outline form our status regarding intelligence things around the world. And one of the points which was clear to him from the CIA was that there was no connection between the Arabs and the Soviet Union. So the previous week, I had debriefed this intelligence officer. Again, these are weeks of debriefings, but he had told me a story which contradicted that. And I'd already written it up, and the CIA already had it. But I don't think there was a personal agenda. I don't know how fast information moves. But I said, I can tell you at least that this line is wrong. And I said, tell me what clearances you had. And he had appropriate clearance. He had more clearances than I did at the time because he was a senior person connected with the Secretary of State. So I told this story to him. He eventually took that information and ran with it, and he got authority to interview the Russian himself, which means that this was a good thing to do, to have the right people talk to the right people. And this was the story. He explained, he said, you know those terror training camps? He said, people think that we recruit individuals at those camps, whether it's in Chad or Libya or Czechoslovakia or in the Ukraine or somewhere. He said, but we don't. I mean, the Russians don't recruit people at those camps. He said, they bring them in, they feed them, they clothe them, they give them the AK-47s, and they shoot them up, and they do all those things. But these are the people who lean in that direction. And they're training the Arabs who want to do, violent things. He said, years later, 5, 8, 10, 12, 15 years later, they have all the names of people who went to all these camps. And there were hundreds. He said, we see someone who rises to our attention in some organization or something in a newspaper, but we see him and, oh, we have a record of him. He was at one of our training camps. So then they approach him and say, gee, we haven't seen or heard from you in a long time. And at that point, they would recruit him. And then he would be in their pocket. He was beholden to them. He learned how to pull the trigger through them. But how did that work? And it goes on to another level. This is the part of which I had no clue, and neither had the intelligence community in the US at the time. But it came from this one particular defector. He explained that he had contacts who were people recruited in that situation. And they were now members of not the PLO, but they considered violent offshoots of the PLO, FLN, FALN, organizations that, gee, I thought the PLO was violent. How violent can these guys possibly be? And the answer was very. And they have cells, like 6 people to a cell, and one person goes to the next cell, one person goes to the next cell. So you have a 6 meeting here, there's got to be 96 behind them, that sort of a thing. And they would have a meeting, and they would discuss, these senior people, what activities they'd like to conduct in the next 3 to 6 months. Blowing up a bar in Berlin, or taking down a plane, or various sorts of things. Those items that they would discuss, they would ponder among them, because they had all this army that was hidden in cells ready to do it. So this Arab, he would come back to the Soviet, and he would explain all the options there were for terrorist activities in the next 6 months. So he would send a telex to Moscow exactly laying out what the man had said. So they would look at what would be good for the Soviet Union and bad for its enemies, what would be just bad for the enemies and maybe good for the Soviets and the way it was directed. Some things they were neutral on, other things they thought, yeah, this could help us. So of the 6 or 7 items, they would say, well, these 2 would be really good, we want these done. These 2, don't let them do these because these would actually harm our interests. And these other 2 or 3, either way you want to do it, it's okay with us. So it turns out they had veto capability. So the man would go back to a meeting. Again, these are senior Arab terrorist guys. I can't say Al-Qaeda because it's early 80s. I'm not sure how it was set up at the time. But he had the ability to say, I'm against these for sure, but these we should certainly do. And that's how they were to control, at that time, what we would describe as Arab terrorism. So that's not disinformation per se, but it's the Soviets controlling what the Arabs are doing. Now, because the wall came down, did any of the flies change? The players are all still out there. So let's assume that that's accurate information. What does that extrapolate to what's going on today? I'm not in the intelligence community. I have no personal knowledge. I retired in 2000. But to me, just setting that up as the baseline, it can only get more and worse.